Hello, Dan Rothwell, author of the new book, Willful Ignorance and Stupid Political Decisions. Today I want to discuss the appeals court decision that came out yesterday dealing with the legitimacy of whether Trump had the right to send in the National Guard to quell the LA protests. A three-judge panel on this appeals court ruled that Trump did, in fact, have a justification. I'd like to read part of the decision that they used to support this legitimacy of Trump, supposedly, to send in the National Guard without any request from Governor Newsom of California. And I'm going to quote this directly. The undisputed facts demonstrate that before the deployment of the National Guard, protesters pinned down several federal officers and threw concrete chunks, bottles of liquid, and other objects at the officers. Protesters also damaged federal buildings and caused the closure of at least one federal building. And a federal van was attacked by protesters who smashed in the van's windows. The federal government's interest in preventing incidents like this is significant. So let me take this apart piece by piece. First of all, they said it's undisputed facts. Okay, they're undisputed facts, but they said that protesters pinned down several federal officers, so they didn't bother to indicate whether the federal officers were seriously injured. And in fact, when you look at the actual facts of the case, there were 20 journalists and reporters that were injured, 2 who were hospitalized by the actions of these officials. Second of all, they talked about concrete chunks being thrown. They don't indicate how many concrete chunks were thrown or whether they hit anybody. Bottles of liquid, the reports that have been in the media, the bottles were water and other objects. Protesters also damaged federal buildings. It doesn't indicate how much damage was actually done, and caused the closure of at least one federal building. How significant is closing a federal building for a certain period of time? How long was the building closed? A federal van was attacked by protesters who smashed the van's windows. Well, there was violence at this protest. By most estimates in the media, the protest never reached a size larger than about 1,000 demonstrators. The overwhelming majority of those demonstrators clearly were peaceful. They were not throwing chunks of concrete. They were not throwing water bottles. There were just a few individuals who were creating trouble and trying to create some mayhem. But it was by and large a peaceful demonstration. So you have to look at this in some kind of perspective. First of all, I was born and raised in Los Angeles. Los Angeles is an enormous city. It is officially 469 square miles. This particular protest occurred in a single square mile in downtown LA. So it wasn't this enormous rebellion. It wasn't an insurrection that would require a massive show of force by the National Guard. Nevertheless, Trump sent in 4,000 National Guard and 700 Marines to quell a protest that was relatively insignificant and by LA standards was actually minuscule. So you have to wonder exactly what's going on here in terms of this court decision. It makes it sound very much like it's more of a political decision than a legal decision, because the justification for giving Trump legitimacy to send in the National Guard on his own seems quite unwarranted.